Greetings. So, I wanted to share a bit about this process of soul-powered healing because it's not so clear. Most of the worldview that we're in right now around inner healing is very mindfulness-based, and that's a valuable perspective, but I think it's a small, narrow perspective. Soul-powered healing is something beyond mindfulness and its ability to transform pain and illness and depression and anxiety and overwhelm. And I want to unpack it a little bit so it makes sense for you. So just to give it context, I want to share a story. I shared this in an email earlier this week, but there was a patient of mine, a client I saw, her name was Rachel, and she had chronic pain, fibromyalgia for years with anxiety and debilitating, really difficult stuff, like just waves of anxiety, panic attacks. And some friends suggested she try mindfulness meditation, and she tried, and it made things worse. She felt more afraid and more pain and more intensity and more disconnected, and had that extra layer of frustration when someone says, here, try this is going to help you, but instead it disappoints and makes things worse. And I've heard that from so many people over the years. It's really hard. But then, so we started working with the practices that I share in soul-powered healing. And things changed a lot. And one of the big things, and this is a principle in mindfulness, but it doesn't always get delivered, is that the idea is not to try to clear your mind and make things quiet and make your mind silent. The idea is that your busy mind actually can be your friend. It's there for a reason. It has a purpose. It has an intelligence. And what we do is, based on the wisdom of the sages, we take the mind, that busy mind, and we bring it on the tour with the imagination, with intention, so that it connects to higher states of love and connection and awe. And through that, it shifts the biology, it shifts the mind. And for her, it had a huge impact because suddenly, like, she's not broken. She's actually got something she can do. She has some agency. She was able to go into a state that was quiet and sweet that she described as feeling like love. And she was able to bring that into her bodily awareness. And that really started to shift her emotions and her bodily pain and her outlook over time. So, all right, let's try to unpack that a little bit. What's really going on? It's a pretty common thing to understand that there's kind of our everyday consciousness and then there's higher consciousness. And you've probably had an experience at one point in your life where like things shifted and it was like, oh, wow, you got a perspective, you got some expansion, you got some relief from the constriction that you were in. Something shifted, you got into a bigger place. And so to put it in the context of what the sages talk about, we have an embodied self, the ego self. It lives in the body. And then we've got a higher self. We've got an expanded self or transcendent self that's more connected to spirit. It's connected to the inner soul. It's connected to the source of life. Everything is connected to the source of life. But when we're in our embodied ego consciousness, we forget about that because it's quiet and it's the still small voice that we don't hear when we're in all of the turbulence and the difficult stuff. And so our modern understanding of chronic pain and chronic illness scientifically is that, first of all, everything's connected to everything else. On a biological, physiological level, your immune system, your gut, your stress response, your hormonal systems are all in a soup, constantly talking with each other. They're constantly talking with your nerves and muscles and the tension in your body and the patterns of muscle contraction. And that soup of information of biochemistry and neurology that is constantly interconnecting in these various cycles, and these various cycles of things like pain sensation evokes distress and stress response, which worsens pain sensation, which feeds into inflammation, which feeds into worse pain sensation. We could go through a whole lot of layers of cycles where things worsen inside that system, and your mind and your body are part of that. Your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs about yourself, your beliefs about the pain. It's part of that soup. And my guess is you probably understand to some degree of what I'm talking about. Like when you're in that cycle of difficult stuff, when the button gets pushed, when things become intense, and like the next person comes along and it's like, "Arr!" Like, okay, where did that come from? All they said was that they wanted to close the light or turn it on or something. So we have these cycles and these patterns, and it's in the embodied soul. And we even have functional brain scanning that's starting to show us that there's this default mode network that contains that self. And constantly, it's a whole set of brain areas that's responsible for things like awareness and memory and emotion and beliefs about self, and hey, how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? And it's constantly firing off that movie of you, that constricted embodied self you, where the disease process is happening, where the pain and suffering are happening. And to my perspective, you can't fix that from inside. Because when you're inside that, you're feeding into it. And I hear that and see that with so many of the people that I work with. And instead, the approach is to get in and out of it. There's a quote attributed to Albert Einstein, which I don't think he really said, but it sounds good. And it goes like this, that you can't fix a problem from the same level of consciousness in which that problem was formed. You can't fix a problem at the same level of consciousness where it is. Inside your embodied self, you don't have the resources. When you go in and up to your transcendent self, the part of you that's above it, that's observing it, then you have more resources. And that's that aha moment. That's the breakthrough moment. That's the moment of clarity and calm, where you have a perspective and you realize there's a solution to the challenge that you're struggling. There's some relaxation. And the question is, how do you get there? How do you turn it on and make it really strong? And how do you bring that back into the body, into the embodied self? So mindfulness is good. There's a lot of good that comes from mindfulness, and I trained a ton in mindfulness. I went on maybe a dozen week-long retreats back in the day when I was, in medical training and before medical training, and brought those practices and what I did clinically and also my own personal development and working with patients with mindfulness. And there was a lot of benefit. And mindfulness is that awareness, that consciousness that says, I recognize what's happening, but I'm not stuck in it. I'm outside of it. It's an awareness. And that can be really useful if you've got strong enough mindfulness to hold all of the turbulence. But what happens for so many people when they try to practice mindfulness, they get just sucked into the whirlpool. So they sit down, I'm going to watch my breathing, noticing my breathing, and then the thought that comes up or the emotion that comes up, and it's like a tractor beam. It just sucks you into the whirlpool and you're gone. The mindfulness is over. And if you're like most people, you start to blame yourself and you're frustrated. Why that happened? Why can't I quiet my mind down? What's wrong with me? And that default mode network comes in. It's like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? It's hopeless. And that's where a lot of people fall when they try to do mindfulness work. When I started to understand the deep teaching of the sages of Torah and Kabbalah about the structure of human consciousness, and understanding that mindfulness is just one stage and there's a bunch of much higher stages. Mindfulness is one of the potencies of human consciousness that we call dat, or knowing. And it allows us to be observant, or to observe what's happening. It allows us to bring compassion if we're plugged into compassion, but it's not necessarily strong. And to really strengthen it, you need to spend a lot of time practicing. And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up, is like, who's got the time to go on a week-long meditation retreat, let alone 10 of them? I mean, I sat there for weeks and met really hard stuff inside. And it's like, you meet the hard stuff and you stay in the breath and you stay aware. You meet the hard stuff and pretty soon it kind of dissolves. And it's like, and I'm crying for like 2 or 3 days straight. And then like whoosh, something opens up and there's an expansiveness and a beauty. And it's a wonderful experience. And you can get that with psychedelics. And you can get that if you spend a lot of time doing mindfulness. But there's also an intrinsic built-in potency and superpower that every human being has, which is an inner soul. And the inner soul, the consciousness of the inner soul, is above and beyond mindfulness. And there's all sorts of techniques for accessing that and touching into a place that is pure and love and clear. And it's completely unsullied by all the difficulties in the whirlpool, in that challenging place of the embodied self. So what we do in soul-powered healing. A lot of this is stuff I learned from studying the holy books and bringing my thoughts and awareness based on all my meditation experience and my osteopathic training and all of that. I also learned a lot from a friend of mine, Reverend Daniel Katz, in the Elevation program. Amazing stuff. Kind of crystallized a lot of this and brought it into focus for me. But we have tools for bypassing or working with that busy, anxious, struggling, judgmental mind and bringing it into a place of illumination and light. We have techniques and tools with breathing. We have techniques and tools with focusing on the holy name of God and going up into a higher state of consciousness. And when we get there, it's like we're out of the system and we can look down at the system with a perspective, with awareness, with love, with compassion that in my experience is so much deeper than what I ever experienced from doing like week-long retreats over and over and over again, because it's something beyond mindfulness. So we get up to that place and it's amazing because when you start to touch that place and spend some time there on a regular basis, there's kind of like this, you have to come back to life. Everything is going and coming. We go in and up to this beautiful space, then we come back down into our lives. Coming back into our lives, into the embodied self, we bring the light. It's sort of like we go up and we touch something beautiful and we grab onto a rope. The rope is a Rishimu, it's an impression. And we can drop down into the whirlpool, but we've got a rope and we got a connection to that light and we bring that light into that space. Some of it just happens spontaneously, just from going in and coming back down to life and going in, and you start to have insights, you start to get downloads, you start to have awareness about how to actually bring more compassion and transformation to the difficult, painful stuff, whether it's mental, emotional, or physical pain. But there's also processes that we do that are very specifically designed to heal the stuff that's in our heart. Processes for realigning relationships. A lot of us have relationship stress and trauma. We didn't get the love we wanted. Maybe our boundaries were crossed or violated. We've had traumatic experiences. Our hearts are yearning for love. Our being is yearning for safety. If our relationships are colored by our preconceived experiences from the traumatic experiences, we're constantly going to be re-experiencing the I'm not loved, I'm not enough, I'm not safe. And that's going to keep feeding into that whirlpool of physiology. So we do techniques that are really about identifying those problematic relationships that may have caused distress, unmet needs, unmet love, crossing of boundaries, trauma. And we very carefully cut the energetic bonds so that other person can have their life and you can have your life and you can connect to the true source of your life, which is independent of that other person. So you're no longer dependent on them for the love they can't give you. You're no longer dependent on them to not cross your boundaries, whether they're energetic, verbal, or physical. You actually connected to your own sense of clarity and life. And there's an empowerment in that that lets you make choices about relationships that you didn't have. We also do work around bringing that light just into the felt sense of the body in a very detailed way, like a body scan, but with the light of the neshama, bringing it into that felt sense. And it's just, it's so sweet. And the body unwinds, the fascia changes, the tissues change, the processing, the neurology changes. It's really quite something. And we do movement arts that might look a little bit like Tai Chi or Qigong, which I was doing for many decades, but now I do it differently. I go in and up and touch the light of God. I touch that place of clarity and love and sweetness. And I breathe that into my body as I'm moving. And I let that breath of God, breath of light, move through me and motivate and mobilize the movements. So soft, flowing, rhythmic movements that are easy to learn that actually bring a consciousness of love and peace and joy into the movement system. And just to explain that a little bit more, your movement system, wow, there's all these brain areas that control movement that are intimately connected with your emotional centers and your emotional memories. And that's part of why getting the body moving is so healing in many cases. And recently I had one of the guys in my class who started doing this particular kind of like chest heart opening movement And he said, wow, I started feeling this anxiety and then it just moved out of me. And like it was just from moving and breathing with joy. Okay, so that's a lot of information. This is a long video. Maybe it's too long. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. There's a lot more to share. I'll share some more in the coming days. And I hope it's interesting to you. I hope that if you have any questions, you'll ask me. Just reach out, send me a private message. If this is interesting to you, please do share it with people you care about because they might get something out of it too. Thanks a lot. All the best.